Magnus Carlsen's reputation is built on his remarkable precision and unparalleled prowess in endgame strategies. His endgame skills are so solid that even chess pieces fear getting checkmated by him. It's like his knights whisper to each other, "Stay away from Magnus." Hence, it's a widely held belief that the only opponent capable of defeating Magnus Carlsen in endgame maneuvers is himself. But after this game against a Russian chess grandmaster Boris Savchenko, it appears that this perception is about to undergo a significant shift. Magnus Carlsen initiates the game by advancing his pawn to e4, prompting Boris to counter with c5. As the initial moves unfold, the game transitions into a Sicilian defense, featuring pawns on c4 and to e4 for white, and pawns on d6 and g6 for black. Following Magnus's move of placing his bishop on e2, both players castle, resulting in a balanced position. At this juncture, Magnus aims to gain an edge against Boris. After Boris develops his bishop, Magnus initiates a formidable plan by moving his bishop to e3, intending to launch an attack after advancing his pawn to f4. However, Boris remains unfazed and promptly positions his queen on a5, connecting his rooks on the back rank. Magnus shifts his rook laterally, and Boris repositions his rook to a more strategically advantageous square. Magnus initiates a swift assault with his pawn, prompting Boris to retreat his knight to a secure position. However, at this critical juncture, Magnus regrettably commits a significant mistake. After careful deliberation, Magnus moves his knight to d5, giving away a free pawn on a2. Boris capitalizes on this, seizing the pawn with his queen. Subsequently, Magnus advances his pawns, evidently harboring a strategic plan. After a few more moves, Boris commits a critical mistake by playing knight to f6, which allows Magnus to play knight to c3. This move attacks the black's queen, but instead of retreating his queen back, Boris decides to go with an aggressive move, knight to e4, attacking Magnus's queen with his knight. Magnus captures the knight with his knight, and Boris puts pressure on the knight with his bishop. After a couple of moves, Magnus decides to trade the knight on b4, and Boris captures back with his pawn. Magnus takes the pawn with his rook, simultaneously attacking the queen. As the game progresses, both players engage in some piece shuffling, leading to the exchange of bishops. Magnus then proposes a queen trade, which Boris should ideally decline since playing an endgame with Magnus is known to be extremely challenging. However, Boris is left with no choice but to accept the pawn capture, allowing Magnus to trade queens and position the bishop on b6. With this turn of events, Magnus senses victory, as Boris is not as proficient in endgame as he is. Boris makes a move by advancing his pawn to f5, prompting Magnus to bring his king closer to the action. A series of pawn exchanges occur, but Boris makes another mistake by allowing Magnus to inch closer to a winning position. Magnus pushes his pawn to h3, and Boris responds by moving his king closer. Magnus takes the opportunity to advance his rook. If you're enjoying this tactical roller coaster, consider subscribing to the Horsey YouTube channel, where we turn chess moves into grand adventures, and kings into charismatic characters. Although the position appears safe for Magnus, Boris introduces some potential threats by moving his rook to b3. At first glance, it seems like Boris is offering Magnus a free rook. However, after the exchange on b3, Boris is positioned to acquire a pawn that can be promoted to a queen. Magnus cannot accept this, so he moves his rook to d1, effectively granting Boris a free pawn. This exchange results in both players having an equal position. Magnus then offers a trade of pieces, which Boris declines, choosing instead to attack Magnus's knight. Magnus retreats from his bishop in response to Boris's attack, and after a bit of back and forth, Boris persists with another attack on Magnus's bishop, coming dangerously close to capturing it. With time running low and tension building, Magnus decides to check Boris's king, which leads to a trade of rooks. Following the rook trade, both players make a few more moves, and Boris advances his pawn to c3, a mere 2 squares away from queening. Magnus takes steps to block this advancement, and Boris defends his pawn with his bishop. At this juncture, Magnus holds a slightly superior position, but it requires flawless play to maintain the advantage. Several moves ensue before Magnus seizes the opportunity to capture Boris's pawn, leading to the exchange of the bishop and rook. In this critical stage of the game, Magnus possesses a rook and 2 pawns, while Boris has his bishop and 4 pawns, with one especially powerful passed pawn. Despite the material imbalance, the position is likely headed for a draw unless one of them makes a significant blunder. Magnus makes a move to bring his king to d3, aiming to defend his pawn from Boris's king. However, this seemingly innocuous move turns out to be a grave blunder. Boris responds by moving his bishop back to e1, and Magnus compounds the mistake by advancing his king to d4. Unfortunately, this move allows Boris to put Magnus's king in check, and after Magnus moves his king in response, Boris can capture a free rook. In the midst of this blunder, Magnus takes his hand off the piece and repositions it to a different square. Fortunately for him, this is an illegal move in professional chess games, and Boris promptly points it out. Magnus reacts with a frustrated expression, scrunching up his face in annoyance, before stopping the clock, signifying the end of the game. This incident serves as a reminder of the rule in professional chess that once a player releases a piece, they cannot change their move. And it stands as one of the rare instances where Magnus Carlsen has played an illegal move in a public game.